came before me yesterday, and I wanted to just put it on the record. And you, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Who represents the state of it?
General Jackson. Actually, I spoke afterwards, and we were curious as to whether or not the bonding company, or if there was a bonding company, if the bonding company were advised of this, because they would be on the, shall we say, financial end.
They would. They really would.
Depending on what Your Honor decides.
Okay, and I just thought about it. I saw Mr. Yoon back there. I have one other little matter after this. But I had a chance to review Mr. Addioli's file. He had requested an opportunity to go to Africa to see his father. But I looked at the nature of the charges against him, and I also did a little research about whether his claim is true, and I didn't see anything in my little research that would show that his father would have to see him before he passed away. So, Mr. Raven had something he wanted to present.
The state had an agreed order.
Okay, well, you want to pass it up to me so I can see what it is? Oh, is this it?
We have a bunch of copies that are not signed, but it's already been stamped.
Oh, I didn't.
This is agreed order regarding numbers 4, 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14.
Yes, Your Honor, so we could, if Your Honor approves of that agreement, then we can dispense with any argument or even reference to those numbers.
Fine with me. I mean, I don't mind ruling on each of them, but if you agreed to it, that's perfectly fine. Let me look through it very quickly. Okay. Well, first two, exactly what I would do on those two. Let me see about the next one. Okay. All right, that was one I would, number 4, I was gonna give some additional thought. Not number 4, number 11, rather. Well, number 12, I agree with that. Number 13. I agree with that. Okay, very well. All right, what do you have now, Mr. Raven?
If I stand here, do I still have to wear the mask, or?
Well, it's up to the people who are closest to you. Now, what's wrong with being over there? I mean, you don't have to wear the mask if you're over there.
All right.
Judge, we don't object.
Okay, it's fine, but I'm just curious. Why there?
Because the problem is I can't hear inside that box.
Okay, that's a good reason.
Yes, sir. I'm half my team is hearing impaired, and I couldn't understand why I kept moving out of the box last week. And then somebody said, "Why do you keep moving out?" And I said, "Because I can't hear in that thing."
Okay.
So anyway, thank you. And for the record, I have complete vaccinations on this. If Your Honor, please, and I advise the state of this, we'd like to recall a witness, Mr. Joey Edenfield.
Okay, the eye in the sky, gentlemen.
Yes.
Yes, he has to be sworn in.
Do you swear to tell the truth to help you guys?
I do. State your name again for the record, please, sir.
Joseph Edenfield, Edenfield.
Yes, sir. And you testified last week, I believe, to what you thought was the number of cameras that were out at Henry Hale in July of 2018, roughly.
Correct.
And I think the number that you thought it was somewhere around 6, to your best
I
record.
think I testified to 6 or 7.
6 or 7. As a result of all of that, we ask you to go back and look at some documentation to see if you could determine a more exact number. You advised me that it could be as high as 13 or more. We're going to go through that this morning.
Yes, sir.
And I advised the state of that, and then I wanted to put you back on the stand to make sure, and we have some emails about that.
Correct.
To clarify all of that. The first thing I want to show you is, and hand you this exhibit. And if you give this to the judge, please, sir. And do you have a pen up there with you?
I do not.
All right, sir. Now, if we could bring up on the screen video JM15. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, sir.
What is that?
This is an overall view of John Henry Hale CCTV overall site plan.
And that is the one that I believe Agent Kennard marked on when he came to see you the second time. Is that correct?
That, I believe so.
All right, and he so testified in court on that. I believe that was in early August when he came back the second time.
Okay.
Now, could we have the second slide? Now, if you watch that, if you just go back, ma'am, one, and then just a transition, go, Judge, if you see this on the screen, it'll just bleed from one to the other. So what are we seeing here?
The same document, but one is in a clearer form, I guess.
Okay. And this is something that, the clearer form is something that you yourself introduced when you were here the last time.
Yes.
So this is actually an overlay of what Officer or Agent Kennard did with what you produced to show exactly where those cameras were that he marked.
Yes.
Next slide. What is that, sir?
It's an overall view of the same complex.
All right, sir. If we could just go back to the second slide. Now, these poles are numbered, is that correct?
Correct.
And if you would just point on the screen where, let's just say poles, just say 27 might be, if you could just mark on there. Put your finger on that. Okay. And where are poles 1, 2, 3, and 4? What area are those in?
I think 1 is here, and I think 4 is here.
All right, sir.
I'm not sure about 2 and 3.
All right, sir. But they are completely farther away from the area in question here.
Correct.
What I'd like you to do is, if you have a pen up there, if you could mark on this document that you have. In fact, I'll give you one that's marked as an exhibit. If you could mark in pen on that second page, if you would, where 27 is, just put a big 27 out in the margin and draw an arrow to it.
On both documents?
No, sir, just one, the one with the exhibit sticker on it,
Oh, okay.
where you made the first blue mark.
It already has 27 on it.
Okay, that's fine. And where, you could just circle that so we're really clear about what 27 is, just circle that. All right, now, the poles 1 and 4, where are they generally that you marked up here?
Okay.
All right, so, and they are, again, they're totally separate and apart from the area that we've been dealing with in this case.
That's correct.
All right, sir. Your Honor, we'd ask that that be marked exhibit next in order.
All right, that'd be 55.
Thank you.
55.
Pursuant to my request after we all spoke, you provided me with some emails that document all of this. Joe, if you would hand this to the witness, please. And just hand this to the judge, if you would. Now, you recognize this document, you provided it to us and brought it to court this morning.
Yes.
All right, sir. Now, before we get into all of this, how many cameras are there out there at Henry Hale?
84.
Is that the number that existed in July of 2018?
To my knowledge, yes.
And you worked there at the time?
Correct.
And since then, you've gone back and looked at the records and looked at the screen and everything to verify that that appears to be the correct number?
Correct.
And, just for clarification, those 84 cameras, they're not 84 different poles, they're 84 collective cameras.
Correct.
So some have 2, some have 3.
Correct.
And thank you, Judge. Some poles have 1 or perhaps 2 or perhaps 3 or perhaps 4 cameras on them.
Correct. And there are some on the building of the office as well.
So when we refer to pole 23, that could have 1 or like 2 cameras on it, for example.
Correct.
Thank you, Judge. And we know for sure that pole 23 was out. We call that the Cyclops because that camera was
it was missing
physically
one.
gone.
Correct.
Okay. And thank you, Judge. So of the poles we're going to talk about, now we're going to talk about actual cameras. You have this email in front of you,
Yes.
all right? And who is that email from and whom is it sent to?
It's from Henry Toohey, which is the Director of Service at Eye in the Sky, and it's to me in my previous role as Security Coordinator at MDHA.
And you were at MDHA then, and now you work for Eye in the Sky.
Correct.
What is the date of that email?
July 30th,
Year?
2020, sorry. Or 2018, sorry.
Say that again so we're clear.
July 30th, 2018.
And this is just a few days after the shooting in this case.
Correct.
but before Mr. Kennard came back in early August.
Correct.
Now, so what is the gist of this email?
The gist of this email is Mr. Toohey has explained to me via this email a series of cameras that have gone down. In this email, he says that 12 have gone down and are showing some sort of power failure, and they need to be sent back to the manufacturer. And he also says pole 1 and 4 are down, but they appear to be a power outage due to possibly a line cut, but they were still going to go out and do some more diagnosing on that with an electrician.
So let's cover poles 1 and 4. When you say they're down, they could have X number of cameras on them?
Correct. I believe they both have 2 on them.
All right, sir. So that's 2 cameras in each, so that's 4. But based on your earlier testimony, those are clearly far away from the area in which we're talking about here in this case.
Yes.
And how many others does he say are out or?
In this email, he says 12.
Now, are they blown out like the Cyclops thing, or are they just not working?
They're just not working.
All right, sir. And so based on this email, based on that day of July 30, 2018, is it fair to say that you believe there were 4 of them in other areas that were out and 12 that were not functional?
Correct.
Thank you. Your Honor, we'd ask that that email be marked exhibit next in order. And I'm going to hand you another email that you provided me.
Thank you.
What is the date? Do you see that email there?
I do.
What is the date of that email?
This email started on August 9th, 2018.
And that is if you read from the bottom up.
Correct.
And then what's the next one above it?
The next, it's August 9th, 2018 as well.
And the one above it?
August 9th, 2018.
And then the highest one?
The highest one is August 14th, 2018.
And one above that?
August 15th, 2018 is the highest one.
Okay. And these are emails between whom?
The same parties, me and Henry Toohey.
What is the gist of these emails?
Explaining the email from July 30th of what they've discovered. They sent back, it ended up being that number of 12 grew to 13, and they sent them back to the Axis camera manufacturer, and this explained what they diagnosed, if they were covered under warranty or not. And I guess this is where I got the 6 that I testified to, because he said 6 were unrepairable due to a surge or lightning damage, and 7 were going to be fixed and brought back.
So in your earlier testimony about lightning, that may not have been lightning strike, it could have been a surge or power surge or something.
Yeah, in this email, I asked, quote, what are you talking about electrical damage? And he says it could have been lightning in the area or a surge.
All right, sir. Your Honor, we'd ask that that exhibit be marked next in order, and ask the clerk, if you would, to please staple that thing because the pages are loose. Now, sir, based on all of this that your memories now refreshed, apart from the 4 that we know are not relevant to the case, how many cameras were not operative in late July 2018?
13 and then the 4, so that would be 17 that we know of for sure.
All right, and we know where those four of those are.
We know where 4 of them are.
And we know where one of them is because that's pole 23, camera 1.
If it's a part of the 13, correct.
Yes, sir.
That is
And what is the
sure of.
total number of cameras out there, you said?
84.
Based on your analysis at this point, is there any way to tell where those 13 cameras are?
At this point, I do not know.
They could be localized in one area or sprinkled out everywhere.
Possibly.
At the time this occurred, you were working for MDHA.
Correct?
That was part of the government.
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of.
And you had this email of July 30. You were aware on that date that at least 12 cameras were out, maybe 13.
Correct.
And this was before Agent Kennard came to you the second time.
Yes, per the receipt, I think he was in August.
Yes, sir. If you would, sir, tell us what I understand now at Eye in the Sky and maybe at MDHA everywhere, you can look at all the cameras everywhere at some central place. But back then, how could you look at the cameras at MDHA? How was that done?
Well, John Henry Hill in particular, I had to go to the site because there was not a network connection, an outside network connection for me to remote in. So I had to go to that office. But it's set up differently now, and that one was forecasted to be set up with a remote connection, but it did not have it at the time.
So to be clear, Henry Hale, this apartment complex where you had the 80-some cameras, you or some other technician had to go to that office and actually look at the screen to look at the cameras.
Yes.
The console that you looked at, what does that console look like?
It's a monitor on the wall, like a TV, and it's a regular, it's called a client server, and it's a regular tower computer that you probably see at every office.
And how many cameras could you see on that thing at once?
Well, that's up to you. You can make you can make it one at a time. You make it up to 64, I think, is the max view you could have at a time. I think we normally set them around 9 to 12 at a time. And then you create different views based off of, say, pole 1 through 4, poles 5 through 8.
So you're able to look at multiple cameras at once if you wanted to.
Yes.
And Detective Kennard was there in the booth with you as you cycled through these various images on both days.
He showed up late. He was late on the first night. The second day, I believe it was just me and him.
The first night, though, that he was there, when he showed up late, he still had access to all the cameras to look at if he wanted to.
Sure.
And you cycled through some, and he selected however many he selected.
The first night, he didn't add anything that we had already selected. The second time, he did pick what he wanted.
Okay. So the first night, you had already canvassed what you thought might be relevant, and then he took what you gave him.
Correct.
The second night, he looked at a whole bunch of them and took one.
Per the receipt, he took one. I don't remember exactly how many he took that day.
And to be clear, if he'd asked, you'd have given him everything.
Sure.
The whole server, all 80 cameras.
Yes.
And you testified earlier, I want to make sure that we're clear. And after how many days from July 26th did these images last?
We shoot for 30-day retention is where they're set.
So after 30 days, they're gone forever.
Yes.
That's all.
Correct.
Mr. Enfield, I don't want to go back over everything that we did the other day, but with respect to your viewing on the evening of July 26th, you started off by yourself, correct?
I don't know if I was with Sergeant Gus Grega right off the bat or not. I might have started off by myself. I cannot remember.
Okay. And in any event, as you're pulling up these images, whether it's either 9 on the screen or 12 or 1, whatever it was, you were able to tell when you got to pole 23, camera 1, that there was nothing there. Is that correct?
I would say yes. It would, if the camera's not there, it'd be a blank screen.
Okay. And did you make any notation of that evening?
No.
All right. And the reason I say that is you would have looked at that pole as having been in the area of interest.
Pole 23?
Yes.
Yes, I think we actually captured a video from pole 23.
Yes. From the camera that was operative.
Correct.
Okay. So point being that if you're watching it and you pull up pole 23, you know there's supposed to be 2
Correct.
images there, and there's just 1.
Correct.
Did you go outside that night and look up at pole 23 to see?
I did not. That was a major crime scene area that I wasn't probably even allowed in.
Okay. Or the next day or the day after?
No.
Okay. So you knew the camera was inoperative, whether it was actually physically there or not?
That
You
is
didn't know
where.
of your own personal knowledge?
Correct. I would have notified Eye in the Sky, since it's under warranty, to go fix any cameras that weren't working, and that's probably what spawned the July 30th email.
And with respect to all of the other images that you looked at, do you recall any others coming up with a blank screen?
I'm sure there were, but I don't recall which ones they were.
Okay, and again, you didn't make any notation or any reference of, oh, pole 23, camera 1 needs to be
No.
repaired. Pole 53, camera 2 needs to be
No, I
repaired.
probably, like again, I would call it in a service call.
Okay. And with respect to the evening of July 26, 2018, you recall how many CDs or DVDs, how many copies you made?
It would have been thumb drives.
Thumb drives, okay.
But I think we gave one to Internal Affairs. I think Don Aaron's office had one. I think, obviously, Special Agent Kennard had one. The DA's office, the next day, I gave you guys one. And there might have been another one for police, so 4 to 5.
Okay. And did you keep a copy for yourself?
No, it would have been burned onto the screen into that server, so it's on that server.
So you have that captured?
It might still be on the actual server. When you export them, you can export them in a file. I can't testify that it's there today. I don't know.
Okay. And you actually don't have access to go back and look at that? At your employment?
I could
or
probably ask MDHA if I could go back and look at that.
Okay.
But it would be exactly what's on those thumb drives.
That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Court officer, hand you back your emails, please, sir. Yeah, I believe it was, somebody mentioned it in the last hearing that pole 23, camera 1 or something, it was like almost a year before the thing got replaced.
I think it was.
Huh?
I think it was.
Okay. Now, on the documents that you have, you talk about how long does it take to replace damaged cameras?
Which one? Which email?
No, I'm just asking you generally speaking. When cameras are out and broken and all this, it takes some weeks or months to get them fixed?
It could depend on the repairs or supply and demand on them, and yeah, it could take weeks to get a.
Or it might take even months?
It shouldn't, but sometimes that happens.
Okay. Now, but you don't know how long it was before these cameras were replaced?
No, I don't. I don't have a record of that to know exactly when they repaired them and shipped them back, nor when I approved the new ones to be bought and they were purchased and to be installed.
Now, if they're removed and taken out, then the little glass thing or the camera's gone?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
All right. And again, you don't know how long it takes to repair these things or how long it took to replace the 13 in question.
Correct.
This jump drive that the district attorney was asking you about, what exactly is on this jump drive again?
the original night video clips. However, I don't remember how many views were pulled that night, but it would be the 2 cars pulling up in the parking lot and the foot chase that we captured.
Got it.
I know for sure.
Now, we know, I think there's 11 captures. I think we
Okay.
counted them up. And we know that one of them was acquired maybe a week or 2 later based on the receipt.
Okay.
So the jump driver thing that you gave Kennard may have contained as many as 10 video clips?
Possibly.
Okay. Or it could have just contained one.
It was not one. It was
more?
Yes.
All right. So however many there were he got the first night was placed on one jump drive.
One jump drive for Kennard, one jump drive for, yes,
Sure, but it was the same data.
same data.
Correct. Now, the district attorney, you said, was also acquired one?
The next day I met, I said his name last time, I can't remember. I met one of their investigators and we gave him a copy.
All right. So they were aware of however many, the DA's office themselves were aware of however many videos had been recovered within a day or so,
I would say so,
because you gave them the jump drive.
yes.
Probably have a moment. Those are my questions, and thank you very much for coming back.
All right,
Yes, sir.
any further cross?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. You're
Here's your emails back.
next witness.
Yes. So far we have 3 exhibits.
Yes, 55, 56, and 57.
Next. Before I call the Morris.
Did you say Mr. Morris?
Yes, but before I do, I want to put in the record the subpoena duces tecum that this court issued on June the 8th, 2021 for certain video images from MDHA Henry Hale, which Your Honor got. Your clerk gave a copy to me and General Moore, and I just want to document the record of what that was.
All right, you want to admit that as another exhibit?
Mr. Morris?
Mr. Raven? Mr. Raven,
I'm
you
sorry.
want that as another exhibit?
Yes, please, sir.
All right, that'll be number 58.
And that is Your Honor's subpoena that the court issued. I'll represent that to the court, and then the documents given to your clerk is at the end of it.
Raise your right hand.
Do you swear to tell the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name again. Oh, I'm sorry. State your name for the record again, please, sir.
John Morris.
And you've been previously qualified as an expert in video acquisition, computers, and the like in this case.
Digital forensics, yes.
All right, sir.
Sorry?
Morris, you testified the other day that General Sessions Judge ordered that the defense be provided with all of the videos in this case. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that was in late 2018?
Yes.
As a result of that, did you actually go out to MDHA and meet the folks out there to get the best copies or whatever it was you were going to get from them?
I did.
Did you also walk around the site out there to take pictures of the various cameras and the like?
I did.
All right, sir. The court officer will hand you this document and ask you if you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
You recognize all this?
Yes.
All right. And just generally, before I introduce it, what is it?
So this is a collection of some of the pictures that I took during our site visit in December of 2018.
All right, if we could just bring that up, please. This would be, there we go. What's the next slide? Go to the next slide. And what is that we're looking at here?
This is a picture of pole 23 that is situated right there on the main road, and the one camera is missing.
Can you tell, what is metadata?
Metadata is data that's embedded into a file that is, technically speaking, data about data. That's the word. And so metadata, when it comes to pictures or images, can include creation dates and other data about the creation of that particular photo.
Can you tell on the image on the left, for example, when you took that picture?
Yes, December 18th, 2018 at 1:53 p.m. local.
And the image on the right, what does that show?
Same thing.
Now that's the pole 23 and it's looking down Joe Johnson.
Correct.
What is the building way down the street there?
That's the high school, or the school, the MLK school, where we have the other video footage from.
Now there's another camera way down there pointing towards us.
Correct.
We'll get to that in a minute. If we could see the next image, please. What is that?
These are pictures of that camera.
Well, it has to come up.
Okay, if you would go back one, ma'am.
Okay.
Now go forward.
So
This is, Judge, this is the same thing without the metadata.
Right.
So I wanted to verify the date. So these are the exact same image?
Yes.
But without the metadata?
yes.
Right, now the camera that is out, what we call that, sometimes we call that the Cyclops, but that is the one where there's no camera at all.
Right. The camera itself has been removed from the housing.
Now there is footage from the other camera that was there.
Correct.
We have that.
Yes.
That is looking down Joe Johnson.
Towards MLK. Yes.
Towards MLK, and we'll see footage from that. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, what pole is this?
This is pole 27.
And what does the metadata show that you took those pictures?
These pictures were taken on the same day, approximately 8 minutes earlier at 1:50 p.m.
Next slide.
Same photos without the metadata
Now,
display.
sir, as you look at the picture on the right-hand side of the screen, can you see the so-called void area from the right-hand side there?
Yes, you can.
All right, if you would, you have a pencil there with you?
I do.
All right, if you would just circle on that document that you have where the void area is.
Okay.
And then if you would mark on with your finger, mark on the screen where the void area is. And also if you would mark on the screen where the camera is that would be seeing that void area.
So in that particular photo, if I recall, it was this camera here
All right.
that would see that.
If you would just sort of kind of draw an arrow from that camera to the void area so we can connect the dots and just, there you go.
Identify that camera.
I believe that was pole 27, camera 1. I think. The number I don't recall for sure, Your Honor. There were 3 on that pole.
Pole 27.
Pole 27, yes.
That's what's important.
Maybe. In a previous exhibit, we actually have the one that we have identified and that camera.
Is that camera 3?
Again, I would have to go back and reference it. It's 1 or 3. I can't recall specifically.
All right, we'll get to that in a moment when we look at the other videos. But now, in the image that you have there, this was taken in December of 2018.
Yes.
Is that camera that you referenced there that's looking at the void, is it there? Can you see it?
You can see in this image and in this image, and I've zoomed in on those in other, times. You can actually see that the camera is physically in place.
Thank you. Next slide. Is that it?
That's the last slide.
All right. So let's make
Number 59.
right. If you give that to the
Oh,
board
I'm
officer,
sorry.
just making it. Yeah, let's hand you this. Oh, excuse me, just substitute that for the one you handed him. Have you looked through those documents?
Okay,
You recognize those documents?
I do.
All right, sir, and you and your team put this compilation together.
Yes.
Would like to have that put up on the screen, please. This will be JM 30.
What it is.
Sir?
Describe what it is. What are they? What are those documents?
Okay, just tell us what they are.
So this it starts off with the same graphic that we saw earlier, which is the diagram of the cameras and the poles, the one specifically referenced as the one that Agent Kennard made his handwritten notes on, is the first page. And then we build on that to show the second image, as we already saw from Mr. Edenfield, that has the overlay of the complex onto that diagram, and then we begin to drill into individual locations on that map.
All right. Thank you. Now, if we could just bring up JM 13, which is my code for this image. Now, what is this, sir?
So this is that same graphic that is the line diagram of the cameras in the complex. And again, this is the one that's been referenced as the one provided by Agent Kennard.
And then it was testified to, those are his handwritten notes on this schematic.
Yes, that was his testimony.
The various cameras marked on there,
Yes.
if you would just go through, the one that we were questioning was camera 27, you see that on there?
Yes, camera 27 is located here.
And where's camera 23, the one with the only one eye?
There.
Got it. Now, if you would look at pole 20, where the little arrows are. And I
There.
believe Agent Kennard testified that he actually made those marks, and
Yes.
of all the cameras on there, he
Yeah, he
actually,
made this mark and this mark,
Right.
which are arrows that he drew on there, kind of pointing. Well, I didn't do a very good job. He has arrows pointing like this.
and he drew that on there apparently.
Yes.
And he said apparently this was the only thing that he thought significant enough to actually draw directionality.
I can't speak to what he thought, but certainly he drew directionality on that camera and none others.
And none of the others.
Correct.
Now let's go to the next slide. What is that?
So this is the image of the complex that we saw earlier, and it has the diagram of the camera layouts kind of overlaid with it.
So that's a compilation of what Agent Kennard did and of what Mr. Edenfield provided us earlier.
Yes.
And this shows the whole complex,
Yes.
all 80 cameras.
Presumably, yes.
All right. Now the ones in question are up at the top left-hand corner of our screen.
Yes.
Next slide. What is that?
So this is a zoom in, if you will, of the two sides of the complex where the events occurred.
And again, the directionality in slide 20, that's shown by the red circle.
Yes.
Next slide. Now we're back to the composite. Next slide. What is this?
So this is that same composite, but now we've added some more visible dots where various poles are located.
And you can actually click on the poles and see what it can see.
Yeah, you can click through these and see each one.
All right, let's go to pole 22. What does that show?
So pole 22, this shows that the pole was located there on that cross or intersection, and because camera 2 was part of the video that we were given, that's indicated from the screen capture there from that pole, and camera 1, as you can see, we did not receive that video.
So there's two, we know there's two cameras on that pole.
Yes,
The one in green is what we were given back in this July of 2000, is what existed in July of 2018.
it's what we were given when I got involved in 2018, yes.
And for purposes of your testimony, we can just assume that that was, I mean, they're dated and timed.
Yes.
So it does.
They are the video from the date in question in July, yes.
Let's use that moving forward, if you would.
Okay.
Now, the red in the bottom, what is that?
That's where we did not receive that footage.
We don't know whether the camera was working or not.
We do not.
But there is a camera pointing in that direction. We just don't have the footage,
Correct.
right?
However, from the site survey, if you look, you can see those cameras are physically there at the time of the site survey.
Thank you. Now, let's go to poll 23. What does that show?
So again, this shows the location of the pole and the fact that we received the video from camera 1. Camera 2 we know was missing at that time.
That's the one where it was physically gone.
Physically gone from the housing.
And this is the camera 1, and shows, and that is a picture of Mr. Hambrick going down Joe Johnson.
Yes.
Now let's go to poll 21. How many cameras are on that pole?
There are 3 cameras on that pole.
Are they all operative?
We received video from all 3 of the date of the event, yes.
And those are images that are from July of 2018.
Correct.
And each one of them shows one of the participants in this case actually moving around.
Yes.
In the top right, that shows Officer Delke and Mr. Hambrick running toward the void area.
It does.
And the one on the lower left, that's Mr. Hudson
Yes.
walking along.
Yes.
And the one on the lower right shows Mr. Hambrick being pursued by Officer Delke.
Correct.
All right, sir. Now let's go to poll 25. How many cameras are on that pole?
There are 2 cameras on that pole.
And you went out there yourself and saw there were 2 cameras on
Yes,
there?
and I have pictures of each of these poles and the cameras that were installed.
What is the pole, what does camera 1 show?
So camera 1 is looking up the complex from the opposite end of the view we just had from pole 21, looking at, in this case, Officer Delke's vehicle there, and Officer Delke getting out and Mr. Hambrick starting to run.
And the camera 2, what does that show?
So the camera 2 points back towards the street there and shows Officer Delke's vehicle coming into the complex.
And again, you went to the site visit, those cameras were there in December of
Correct.
2018.
Yes.
Now let's go to poll 24. What is that?
So this is a camera that's there on the corner of Pearl and I start to lose track of which street these are, but it's on the corner kind of opposite from where all of the event occurred. And there are, on that particular pole, there are 3 cameras. We received footage from 2 of them.
And it actually shows Officer Delke's car in camera 3,
Yes.
and he's at the corner of Pearl Street.
Yes.
And then the camera 2 shows him going into the complex.
Correct.
And these are just still shots.
These are frame captures from the video, yes.
And how long is that? Each video from each camera lasts how long?
We got 15 minutes of video footage from each camera.
Camera 1, we don't have any footage from
We
that.
did not receive footage from camera 1.
I don't know what, but you went out there and took pictures of all these cameras.
Certainly, and in looking in the photos, you can see the cameras physically in place.
All right, sir. Now let's go to poll 25.
We just looked at 25 last.
We did. All right, let's go to poll 26. What is that?
So pole 26 is on the southern end of the other half of the complex, the eastern half, and we received video from cameras 1 and 2, camera 2 facing north, and camera 1 facing to the east.
And that, I believe, shows Mr. Davis with his backpack running around the complex.
Camera 2 certainly shows that there, and then camera 1, much later in the footage, you see him wandering off to the east.
And in the picture there in camera 2, you can actually see him with his backpack. Is that right?
Correct.
Now let's go to pole 27. All right. How many cameras are on that pole?
3.
Camera 1, is that footage that we received,
We did.
and that is from that date, July 2018.
It is.
Camera 3, that is footage that we got, I believe it was December of last year, to recreate what that camera would show. Is that correct?
Correct.
We saw that with the little dog walking along
Yes.
and the other thing. Is that camera 3, when you said you weren't sure which camera we were talking about on pole 27, does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, I was getting 1 and 3 inverted.
What is the camera? Let's be real clear. When you did your site visit, was camera 3, pole 27 in existence?
It was physically in place, in existence in December.
You
Yes.
got a picture of it?
I have pictures of it.
All right. So camera 3 view shows what that camera's pointing at,
Yes,
but we don't have any image from this July 2018.
that was not provided.
Camera 2,
Also not provided.
and that's firing up, where's that pointing?
It is, the camera is physically oriented to the north. Now, where it would have been pointing, I can't say.
Okay. Now let's go to camera, I think we've covered all the cameras. Let's go to 20, where Mr. Agent Kennard drew his little lines.
Okay?
And that's the one, for the record, that's the one, Your Honor, that we issued the subpoena for, that we got, that your clerk received just a couple of days ago. And what pole is that?
This is pole 20.
And that's the one Agent Kennard drew his point of views.
Yes.
The top camera 1, we did not receive that from July 2018.
We did not.
The camera 2 at the bottom, we did not receive that.
We did not.
Now let's talk at the top camera. What is that pointing at?
So camera 1 points north up Henry Hale Boulevard, and in the events that occurred on that date would have shown the vehicle driven by Mr. Hambrick going up that street.
On which side?
On the wrong side. He would have been going the wrong way down a one-way.
And we know that from the other camera when he comes into the complex.
We do.
And draw the arrow on the wrong side, or the side you said that this would have shown Mr. Hambrick's vehicle.
Would have shown Mr. Hambrick's vehicle driving this way, this side of the road.
Point a little arrow, head, directionality. And draw that on your piece of paper you got there.
Okay?
And when you say that Mr. Hambrick's vehicle, that's the one where we see seconds later all of them bailing out of that white car.
Further up past the view of this camera, yes.
Correct. Now, what is the one on the bottom?
So camera 2 is facing kind of southeast, and it looks down Pearl down here, which in this particular event, the vehicles, both Mr. Hambrick's vehicle and Officer Delke's vehicle would have driven up this way. And then Mr. Hambrick turned the wrong way up Henry Hale, and Officer Delke continued on down Pearl.
Would you clear that for me? Go to the bottom one, put Mr. Hambrick in one color and Officer Delke in another.
All right. So Mr. Hambrick would have done this. Officer Delke like this.
Draw that in the pencil.
We have one color here. Okay?
And while it didn't show any it would not have shown any people outside of cars, it would have shown the cars.
Would have shown the vehicles coming into the area, yes.
And all these MDHA cameras have the same time, they're all running at the same calibration of time.
They're all appear to be synchronized to a common time source on the system, yes.
So if we had that camera, pole 20, camera 2, we'd know exactly how far Officer Delke was behind Mr. Hambrick to the second.
Yes. It would have been very, very easy to calculate from that particular image.
And also, on camera 1, we would have known, perhaps gauge the speed of Mr. Hambrick as he's going up that street, because we'd have more footage.
Certainly.
Any more slides? Have we been through all the polls?
That's the last one.
Let me see, let me ask my technician. All right. The technician tells me that I think we've been through all the polls. What I'd like to do is make that an exhibit next in order.
Okay, that would be number 60.
And Your Honor, since this is a PowerPoint, I'm going to ask the court to make the PowerPoint an exhibit, maybe B.
Yeah, that would be A and B. The documents would be A, the
Yes.
PowerPoint would be B.
Archie. Mr. Morris, before I go a whole lot further, how long have you been doing computer work?
Computer work itself, since I was 14.
And how long have you been professionally certified to do computer work?
Well, when you say certified, that's a tricky question. I mean, certainly I was doing work with technology in the military in the 80s. I was at Microsoft for the better part of 17 years in various capacities. And then since leaving there, I've been doing forensics work for the last 5 to 6 years.
As part of your duties and job and working for this service and everything, have you had an occasion to acquire video footage from various private and governmental sites?
Yes.
What is this, particularly where you know that it's a criminal case, what is the standard of care, professional standard of care of acquiring video footage from a potential crime scene? What is the standard of care that you yourself have engaged in?
So there is a well-documented and articulated process and procedure for obtaining digital evidence, specifically when there's a forensic concern, meaning you want to preserve it in its original form. And when it comes to video, there are two kind of golden rules. Golden rule number one is you want to get the video in as close to native format, in other words, the way it was created, as possible. And number two, you want to get as comprehensive a selection of video evidence, or any digital evidence, quite honestly, because it's much easier after the fact to call it down than it is to go back and recover it, because it is so ephemeral. So with video evidence, the general rule of thumb is get everything and sort it out later.
With respect to the technical native form, do you feel like, based on everything you've seen, that we have the very best native form of the images that were captured?
Once I went on site and retrieved the original extractions, yes, we got the native format video.
What about the professional standard of acquiring as much video as possible?
Again, because digital evidence, not just video, but all digital evidence is very ephemeral, meaning it can be deleted, overwritten, or in this case, there's a 30-day retention period, which is standard. You know it's not going to be there forever. So when I'm doing an acquisition of evidence, again, the idea is to get everything and then call it out. And in fact, in e-discovery processing, that's one of the first things we do, is to call out what's not relevant. But it's far easier to collect everything and call than to leave stuff out and then try to go back and get it, because oftentimes it's gone.
Now, if you're trying to find, let's say, 10 images on a 80 camera site, Is it easier just to grab it all than to cherry pick one at a time?
Certainly with the time constraints that are usually involved in obtaining evidence and such, absolutely. You heard Mr. Edenfield say there were 84 cameras. Were I charged with going and preserving information in a lawsuit, for example, of video evidence, it would simply be much more efficient to say, let's just take all the cameras, the relevant time period, dump it to a disk, and then we'll filter through it later.
And that is a professional standard of care?
Absolutely. It's also well documented there are certain standards that we review and use in our business that are documented by the Department of Justice that we incorporate, and they articulate that as well.
And that's not only with respect to police departments, TBI, and DA's office?
It's a general standard of forensic science.
In this
or digital
particular
science.
case, sir, we're not dealing with Walmart footage, we're not dealing with private company, we're dealing with the government, is that correct?
MDHA certainly is part of the metro government, yes.
So they don't need subpoenas or anything, they can just go in there and ask for it.
That's my understanding, yes, they can get it at will.
Now, we're going to get to this much later. When we want to talk just very, very generally, when we see all these videos, it's sort of choppy. You don't see a smooth image running along. When we all go to the movies, what is frame rate?
So frame rate is the number of images per second that are in that video. And the easiest way to conceptualize it, if you think back to the old days of cellulose film, and you would have frame, 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 or when we were kids, you would have the little book where they would draw the cartoon characters, and if you thumbed through it, it would appear that the cartoon character was running. So frame rate is simply like those cells in the film, how many of those there are per second.
When we go to the movies and we see a nice thing on the screen, approximately how many frames a second are we looking at?
So these days, it's 120 in some cases. 60 is certainly kind of a bottom line. With some of the ultra high def, it can get up to 240.
If we look at movies from the 1900s and everybody's moving along very slowly or choppy, why is that?
It's because there are far fewer frames per second.
On the MDHA, the ones we've been looking at here for the last 3 days, what is the frame rate?
So it is not a simple answer because it's what's called variable frame rate. And the reason it's variable frame rate is because with 84 cameras going over a network filtering into a common storage source, the system has to make intelligent decisions as to where to dedicate that bandwidth. Again, think of it like water pipes or highways. You've got to give a bigger pipe or a bigger road to where the priority traffic is. So the system is set up to prioritize if there is, activity or something, it'll increase the bandwidth and reduce it for areas where there's not. All that being said, the video that we reviewed in this particular case was, generally speaking, approximately 5 frames per second.
And that's why it's so choppy.
Because, right, again, go back to those
I'm gonna
cells
hold
or the pages. It's just, you're getting 5 images.
I'm going to hold my hand up. I got 5 fingers on my hand. Each finger representing data, image.
An image, yes.
What's happening between my thumb and this finger here? Do we know?
We don't know.
Why?
Because the camera did not capture that activity. So between frames 1 and 2, any activity that occurred there is gone.
So if a normal film is 60 frames a second and we're shooting at 5, we can do the math. It's a lot of data missing.
A lot of time that was not captured, yes.
That's a function of the camera.
It's a function of the camera and the system and the way it's configured, yes.
Now let's move from MDHA to MLK. You said there was a school up the street.
Yes.
And there was some footage that was captured by that, and that was given to the TBI and the police. TBI.
Correct.
Now I'm going to show you an exhibit. Give this to the witness and the other to the judge, please. Can you see that?
I do.
Just generally speaking, what are those images?
So this first page is a overhead view, if you will, of the western side of the complex. And in the upper right-hand corner, we have pole 23 indicated by a graphic and highlighted there. And then to the upper left-hand corner, or the northwest, you see the MLK school.
So this is what the camera can see and where the camera is located.
It's certainly where the camera's located, yes, in this graphic.
Now let's go to the first image. Now tell me what we're looking at here.
So this is the one I just described. You see pole 23 in the upper right-hand corner, indicated by the graphic with the yellow highlights. This is the western half of the Henry Hill complex.
Where is the MLK camera?
The MLK camera is right about,
Just John, put an M up there where the MLK camera is, roughly.
roughly up that way.
Now, if you would use another color and draw roughly, just generically, the directionality of Mr. Hambrick and Officer Delke as they're going up Joe Johnson.
Okay, so they came around the corner and ran this way.
All right, so pole 23 would capture them running away from the camera,
Correct.
and the MLK would show them going towards the camera.
From a much greater distance away, yes.
If you could just draw on your map there the M for the MLK camera, and then draw what you did in the yellow. If you could just draw the pencil on the
Okay,
piece of paper.
I'm
that
sorry,
you have.
on the
Yeah,
gotcha.
since this is not going to be capturable when we're making an exhibit. So for the record, Your Honor, the witness is drawing an M where the MLK camera is on the diagram, drawing an arrow where Officer Delke and Mr. Hambrick were running. Now, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to clear that. And what are we looking at here?
So that is a picture of the MLK camera.
And where is it pointing towards?
It's pointing back to the east down Joe Johnson.
Next slide. What is this?
So this is an overhead of that area we just looked at. Now we've got MLK on the left here, the complex on the right. And back to your previous question about where is that camera pointed, to be more specifically, its general orientation is back down Joe Johnson. It's actually focused on a doorway at the end of the school, which presumably was its primary purpose as a security camera.
Now, what is the approximate distance from the camera to the intersection there at the end of Joe Johnson?
Well, as you can see, we kind of roughly measured these distances from the camera. It was approximately 200 feet to kind of the corner of the complex there, and approximately 400 feet to the eastern corner.
If you would draw with a different color the approximate route of Officer Delke and Mr. Hambrick. And the void area is where?
The void area is kind of back over here.
Got it. All right, if you would draw a little with your pencil, draw on the drawing the arrow.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Lawrence testified yesterday that the camera's out there at MDHA about 13 feet in the air,
Correct.
and this MLK camera that's also up in the air.
It's in the air. I don't recall it being quite as high, but I don't know exactly how high it was.
But certainly not ground level,
No, absolutely not.
and not the height of a human being, 5 or 6 feet.
No.
Let's go to, if you clear the screen, let's go to the next image. What is that?
So that is a view of or from that MLK camera that has not been zoomed, enhanced, or anything. It's simply a frame capture from that camera.
Now let's, if you would, that is what the camera can actually see.
That is what the camera sees and records, yes.
roughly, just draw a little arrow there of where Officer Delke and Mr. Hambrick are. Where would they be?
At the kind of the end of the chase, they're approximately right in this area.
And they begin where?
It starts back down here and kind of goes forward.
All right, so
It's hard to do with that tiny granularity.
if you would just draw a little circle around the area where they're actually depicted in the video that we're going to see in a second. Now let's stop for a moment on there. What you've just drawn a circle around, that is the entirety of the movement between Officer Delke and Mr. Hambrick on Joe Johnson.
Pretty much, yes,
And that's what? 5% of the screen image? I mean, what is the percentage there?
I mean, percentage, I don't know, but it's certainly a very, very small segment of that overall field of view of that camera.
Now, is the frame rate, you said that the frame rate at MDHA could be like 5 frames a second. What's the frame rate out here?
You know, I would have to go back and check. This one was higher. I
Was it
think-
lower?
I'm sorry?
Was it lower or higher?
It was higher. It was a better frame rate than the other, but I'd have to check the resolution and frame rate. I honestly don't recall
Okay.
on this camera.
So as you sit here, you don't know whether it could be higher or lower?
I think the MLK was a higher frame rate, but that's really not the challenge that we were running into here.
All right. If the police report shows that it was 4 frames a second,
Then that's probably accurate. I could confirm very quickly what the frame rate was. I just don't recall
all right, sir.
on that one.
But it's certainly different than the other one.
It was, yeah.
Now, let's go to the next slide. What is that? Go back. What is that?
So that yellow circle is the highlight of where the actual shooting occurred. Or the entire chase ended.
All right, sir. Now, let's mark that exhibit next in order. And I have a slide of that. Here. So there'll be 2 exhibits here. Yes, sir. You're aware that shortly after the shooting, the district attorney's office released a video to the world of the shooting down Joe Johnson.
Yes.
The image that was released, was that what we just saw, that big, huge area with just a little tiny dot?
No, the image that was released was taken from footage from that camera, but it was zoomed in considerably when it was released.
Now, when you start zooming in on a camera with this kind of resolution, you start losing quality.
That's correct.
Now, what we're going to do is, you have a moving image now of what this chase looks like from the camera in real time from that 400 feet away.
400 feet at the beginning of it, sure, certainly, yes.
All right, we could play that.
Yeah, that's 4 frames per second.
I'm sorry?
That is definitely 4 frames per second.
So you amend your testimony that there is 4 frames a
Yeah,
second.
I honestly thought this was higher, but watching that vehicle go by, I can tell.
Now, do you see Mr. Hambrick and Officer Delke?
Just barely.
And I'm just going to point to this area. Is it right around in here? Is it?
Yes.
So that is what you would actually, that is what the real camera shows in real time.
That is the unmodified, unedited footage from that camera of the event.
Is it possible, looking at that, to identify the identity of either person?
Certainly at that distance, I would argue it is not.
You certainly can't tell whether anybody has a gun or anything like that.
Not at that distance from that camera, no.
So, Your Honor, we'd like to mark that as exhibit next in order. And that'll be in the form of a CD. I'll hand the district attorney a copy of the CD, provide the court with a CD that the court just seen. Just have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you, sir. Those are all my questions. You may ask.
No question, Your Honor. All right. Excuse us, Mark. We're going to take a 15-minute recess.
Court will be in a recess.
All right, we're back. Mr. Raven, you have another witness?
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I've asked Mr. Raven, we'd like to call a witness out of the turn, if that's okay. She should be quick.
That's fine with me.
All right, the state calls Lisa McClendon.
Okay. Is she an expert in some field?
She is not an expert, Your Honor.
Okay, I just needed to know whether we needed to go through that.
Do you swear to tell the truth, so help you God? I do.
Okay. And Your Honor, her testimony will be in relation to defense motion in limine number 9.
Which is, I have to locate it. Oh, you say defense motion in limiting number 9.
Yes, Judge.
Okay. Go ahead, I'll locate it.
Okay. Good morning, Ms. McClendon. Would you please state and spell your name for the record?
Lisa McClendon, MCCLENDON,
Okay, and where do you work?
Criminal Justice Planning.
What is that?
It's a department where we, the purpose of our department is to provide system-wide criminal justice data and reporting to criminal justice departments and policymakers so they can take that data and make informed management decisions.
And just to be clear, that's a department within the Metropolitan Nashville
It is, yes.
government. Okay. And what is your role there?
I'm a research statistical analyst.
Okay. In that role, have you been contacted by Mr. Rabin and our office to prepare a report?
I have.
Okay. And what kind of report were you asked to prepare?
Basically, it was a report that pulled filings from General Sessions Court and ultimately was to pull the number of defendants that had both a evading and a weapons charge filed on the same day.
Evading arrest?
Yes.
Okay. And then...
Hold on just a second. Did you say number 11? Motion in limiting number 11? 9. Okay. Because I looked at 11 and that did not relate. Go ahead with your testimony.
All right. And how are those records stored?
They're pulled from these particular ones were pulled from the criminal justice database for General Sessions, the CJIS database. And again, these are just filings in General Sessions Court.
Okay. So I guess I want to make sure I understand it. When an officer drafts a warrant and an individual is arrested, those records, you're able to pull those records and put them into a report?
Yes, but these particular ones came from the CJIS database.
From the CJIS database?
Clerks, yes.
Okay. I'm going to pass up this report if you don't mind. And defense has a copy of this. Okay.
I've seen that, John.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. McClendon, do you recognize that document?
I do.
And what is it?
It's the report I created for Attorney Rabin.
Okay. And that was also provided to the state, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, could you just read off what the title is that you have in bold of it?
Warrants and defendants with evading arrest charges filed in General Sessions Court. The date range is 7/27/2016 through 7/26/2017 and 7/27/2017 through 7/26/2018. It includes count of accompanying weapon offenses.
Okay. And how many pages is this document?
18.
Is this the document that you report that you created?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then I'd ask that this be made an exhibit to this hearing, Your Honor.
All right. That would be number 60.
Because it's ultimately going to be contested, we don't have objection to it being introduced, but we would ask that it be marked under seal.
Mark is what?
Under seal.
Okay, that's fine. Number 63.
And Ms. McClendon, this report, when you prepared it, you said that you pulled it from Caesar's records. What does that distinction mean?
It's the clerk's database where they store all their records, where it's public record where you can go into a clerk's office and pull up information.
Okay.
But I pull data from the database itself.
You pull data from the database itself, and these are public records?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Those are all my questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. Just a moment, Jim. All right.
Man, when you mentioned Attorney Rabin, that would be me. We talked about these statistics several times.
Correct.
And I wanted to look and see what it was that you were using for these statistics. And so that was the scope of our conversation.
Correct.
But this is a report that is prepared by the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, for which you are employed.
Correct.
So it's a government report, so to speak.
Yes.
And how long have you worked for the Criminal Justice Planning Unit?
Since 2012.
And your degree of expertise to compile statistics is what?
My background was administrative officer of the courts for 18 years, working on court software and statistics.
You worked for the AOC for 18 years. That's good enough for me. And you did data compilation for them as well.
Correct.
So this includes the 2 calendar years going back from the date of the shooting here in time.
Correct.
And this includes the larger numbers, people arrested for warrants for evading arrest. And then we have people with evading arrest and a weapons charge.
Correct.
I believe those are all my questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you.
Anything further? Thank you, Mr. McClendon. You're excused.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay, are we back to your witnesses, Mr. Raymond?
Now we're back to my group.
Thank you.
The next thing I want to introduce, Your Honor, is an excerpt from the preliminary hearing, which is already in evidence, but I just want to introduce an excerpt of it. And this would be the testimony, and hand this to the judge if you would. This will be an excerpt of the testimony of the preliminary hearing. I'm certainly not going to play all of it, but basically this is the testimony of Officer Trevin Tolbert, first officer on the scene after Officer Delke, who retrieved the pistol from Mr. Hambrick and advised that the pistol was found in his left hand. And Officer Tolbert introduced photographs at the preliminary hearing, which is already in record, of that. Do you have that? If you could just put that up. Officer Tolbert. Not his report, his picture. And that Officer Tolbert introduced this at the preliminary hearing, and this is the manner, several photographs of the way he recovered the pistol from Mr. Hambrick, of course, Mr. Hambrick being on the ground. Next picture.
Though that's not a true representation of the weapon itself. That looks like a taser.
No, sir. That is what that is. That is not a taser. That is a plastic Beretta pistol.
Okay.
It's identical to we got him from Beretta, but that is a reproduction of it. We didn't want him to hold the actual gun in
Okay.
court.
That's what I was trying to get clarification.
Correct. That is a reproduction, life-size model of a Beretta pistol, 40 caliber. Next picture. Next picture. Next picture. Thank you. And for the record, I'll put that testimony of Officer Tolbert and the photographs I just showed as exhibit next in order.
Number 64.
Thank you. Now let's call Johnny Lawrence.
Do you swear to tell the truth, so help you God?
I do. State your name again for the record.
It's Johnny Lawrence, Lawrence.
And you were qualified as a crime scene expert.
Yes, sir.
This particular case, were you approached about being a crime scene expert in this case?
I was approached about doing some diagrams,
And who asked you to do that?
the district attorney's office,
And what did you advise them when they asked you to do that?
that myself and the company I work for, Barry Waltz Investigations, are on retainer for Attorney David Rabin.
Thank you. Now, in your analysis, and Your Honor, all of this testimony for the record is all going to go to the Ferguson motion. That's all this is going to be in the void area.
Well, that's what I thought all of this was about anyway.
Absolutely. Now, first thing we want to talk about is, you recall at the preliminary hearing, the medical examiner testified that Mr. Hambrick had certain injuries on him that probably were not sustained when he fell in the grass after he was shot, but that the injuries probably occurred when he was in the parking lot.
Yes, sir.
All right, if Your Honor, please, there's already been a video played in evidence. Then I want to play in evidence again. Let me find out what exhibit that was. It was exhibit 43, it's already in evidence 43. And we'll just play it again for the, we have it up here, that says K07. What do we, just stop that for a second. What is that we're looking at here?
This is camera P21, camera one pointing east in the parking lot behind the 1600 block of Joe Johnson Avenue, looking at Henry Hale.
A video that the state gave us.
Correct.
All right, if you could just rewind that. Keep going. The yellow circle that we saw in the video, what was that depicting?
The item that was leaving his left hand.
Yes, sir.
That was later turned out to be a cell phone.
And you've examined this video multiple times?
Yes, sir.
Were you
Many
trying to
times.
find out whether Mr. Hambrick had a weapon in his right hand at the time?
I did try.
Did you go to the TBI laboratory and look at all the physical evidence?
Yes, sir.
And when you were there, I was there, and many of the district attorneys were, and the entire defense team was there.
Correct.
Hand this to the judge, if you would, and hand this to the witness. Do you have that exhibit in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Just generally speaking, what are those pictures of?
These are photographs that I took while at the evidence viewing of the Beretta 40 caliber that I was advised, and it was documented, came from Mr. Hambrick.
And that, as we saw, Officer Tolbert recovered from Mr. Hambrick's left hand.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, please, we'd like to put those images up on the screen so he can tell us what they show.
Is there any real necessity for that?
Yes, sir, because of what he saw on the weapon, the marks on the weapon. That's what he's going to test. It's not just the weapon. We've seen that. It's the marks on the weapon.
All right.
Go ahead. All right, is this the weapon itself?
Yes, sir.
Next slide. What is that?
That is a damage to the right side of the grip that actually travels from the center of the grip down to the lower left, going in the direction of about 7 o'clock. It's a plastic grip, and it's kind of like an abrasion where it's slid across an abrasive subject and pulled the plastic with it.
Next. Is that the area you're talking about?
Correct.
Did that appear to be old or fresh?
Fresh.
What does that indicate to you?
That it had just happened recently, and the reason I knew that was because you can see the plastic hanging off the bottom of it. It hadn't flaked off.
Now, when you say recently, of course, this pistol was acquired by the TBI or whoever July of 2018, and we're out there looking at this in 6 months later.
Correct.
But it's preserved by the TBI.
It was in a box, sealed in a box when we
So when you
arrived.
mean fresh, it was fresh when it was recovered at the scene.
Correct.
All right, next slide. What are these images?
Those are other damaged areas of the weapon.
Now, the lower left, what is that?
Lower left is what we just viewed. It's just a side view of it.
And the upper images?
The upper images, the one on the left is actually metal, and it's had abrasive reaction on it. The one on the right is plastic, and you can see damage on it.
Okay. And then, next. What is that?
It's a close-up view of the hammer and the area behind it that shows the two locations with damage.
Next.
Got them highlighted.
And then the next.
It's just additional pictures showing the same
Next.
two spots.
Okay. Next.
That's the metal piece behind the hammer.
Okay. Now, next.
This is, I've put the magazine, empty magazine in the weapon, and it's just another view of the grip where the first pictures we saw. You can actually see the directionality of the damage.
Okay. Now, you can't tell, just from looking at this, exactly how, assuming Mr. Hambrick was holding it, you can't tell from looking at this how the gun was held or in which hand just from looking at this.
No, sir.
Okay. Should have been held upside down, left hand, right hand, we just don't know.
Correct,
from looking from this.
correct.
All right, sir. But in your opinion, as an expert, all of these marks, would that be consistent with them being rubbed on a parking lot asphalt? Well, let me restate the question. Are all these marks consistent with being rubbed on an asphalt similar to the photograph we saw of Mr. Hambrick falling in the parking lot?
It is.
Your Honor, we'd ask that that be marked. Exhibit next in order.
Number 65.
Hand this to the witness if you would, the copy to the judge. Now, Mr. Lawrence, in an effort to determine which hand this might have been held in, without determining positioning and all of that, were you able to look at the autopsy pictures?
I was.
And what do you have there in front of you?
Yes, these are pictures from the medical examiner's office.
The only part of, and what does it show?
It's Mr. Hambrick's right hand, and pictures in the back shows his elbow, right elbow.
All right, and that's all it shows? No bullet holes or anything like, we're just talking
No,
about?
sir, this is just the hand and elbow area.
All right, and why did you want to look at these pictures of his hand?
Wanted to see if there was any damage consistent with what I located on the weapon.
And that would tell you which hand it was in?
It would give me a much clearer view.
Okay. So potentially you could line up the damage to the hand with the damage to the weapon and make some conclusions?
Yes, sir.
All right. Your Honor, please, we'd like to just show that so he can explain.
All right, at this time, since these are autopsy photos, the state would object to them being displayed.
Yeah, I do have a little problem with that. I mean, he can explain it, he can testify, but,
All right,
all right.
that's fine, Your Honor. Without, I don't want him up, but let's just go ahead with, just tell me what is the second picture there, what does that show?
The second picture is showing the palm area of the hands with the fingers folded over. And in the yellow circles, you see damage consistent with abrasions that I found on the weapon.
The third picture?
It's a close-up view of the fingernail that had damage and also the abrasions on the fingers.
Is that up to just for the first or second knuckle?
Correct.
And then the autopsy 58?
I've got yellow circles around 6 areas of damage, which is abrasions on the knuckles and then the damage to the fingernail.
Judge, that's the fourth picture in, and you actually put those circles around all the damages?
Yes, sir.
Fifth picture in?
Number 084 is an abrasion type injury to the right elbow.
Of Mr. Hambrick?
Correct.
And the last picture?
It's circles showing the large abrasion area and some small areas in the circles.
All right, sir. Your Honor, we'd ask that the marked exhibit next in order under seal.
Number 66, under seal.
You know, comparing the weapon and the injuries and seeing the actual video, do you have an opinion as to whether Mr. Hambrick was holding that weapon when he fell in the parking lot?
Yes, sir.
What is the opinion?
It is my opinion that Mr. Hambrick had the weapon in his right hand in some type of position.
And the weapon was damaged as it was sliding on the parking lot?
Correct.
And so was his hand?
Correct.
Weapon in the right hand. And then you said the cell phone got,
Later was learned to be a cell phone, came from the left hand.
so he pitches a cell phone under the car with the left hand.
Well, he didn't necessarily pitch it.
It's moved
Correct, from his left hand
under the car.
towards the area of the car. Yes, sir.
Okay. But it comes from his body underneath the car.
Correct.
And we can actually see that.
Yes, sir.
Or whether it's, as the judge pointed out, whether it's pitched or whatever, however the mechanics of it is, it leaves his hand and goes under the car.
Yes, sir.
But the pistol's retained.
Yes, sir.
And then we'll carry on. The pistol continues to be in his possession as he goes all the way around to Joe Johnson where he's ultimately shot.
Yes, sir.
In your opinion, from that moment to the moment where he's shot, where Officer Tolbert found the weapon, did he have the weapon, in your opinion, in one hand or the other that entire time?
Yes, sir.
Not in his pocket, I mean in one hand or the other.
No, sir. Either left or right at different aspects.
Now, what I want to ask you about is the void area. We're going to go through that now.
Yes, sir.
Did you take pictures and still pictures and enhanced pictures of this void area to determine whether or not you could see Mr. Hambrick and whether you could see Officer Delke at certain points?
Yes, sir.
And what was the point of you doing this, making these measurements and trying to find these things out?
After going through the discovery, I'd learned some information that this area was pretty critical to the case. And without the camera that was pointing in that direction, I had to try to locate as much information as I could with the evidence that I did have, which was camera 21, camera 23, and the MLK camera.
Right. And were you able to determine, in looking through all of this, did you perform an analysis of the various shadow patterns on the ground as both Mr. Hambrick and Officer Delke were moving along?
Yes, sir.
And the images that we're about to see are just the videos and your diagrams of what we've already seen of Mr. Hambrick falling in the parking lot.
Correct. The video should be just a zoomed in version, and then I did diagrams from what I observed.
All right, sir. Now let's, if we could, just bring up JL 19. Next. Next slide. Now, what is this? What are we looking at here?
This is camera 23, and it's pointing west down Joe Johnson.
Now, all of the tall objects there, telephone poles and mailboxes, do they all cast a shadow?
Yes, sir. Everything is casting it these directions, and I went back out and took measurements from those two different points and determined it was nearly a 45-degree angle of a shadow.
And this happened about 7 o'clock in the evening?
Yes, sir. But I was going by the markings of the measurements I had previously. Instead of being there at 7 o'clock, I was looking at point A, point B on the shadows and getting that directionality.
So the sun is low in the sky casting these long shadows?
Yes, sir.
Next slide. Who is that?
That's Mr. Hambrick.
Do you see he is casting a shadow?
Yes, sir, in this area.
Mr. March, if you could speak, move the microphone, because
Yes, sir. He's casting a shadow. It's in the area in between the green.
so you could see his feet, his hands,
Yes,
and him.
and it goes to about the top of the sidewalk here.
Sir?
His shadow extends to about this area.
All right, sir. Now, cancel that. Now, knowing that you can see shadows to determine where people and things are. Next slide. What is this?
This is one of my diagrams, and it has the routes Mr. Hambrick and Officer Delke took during the chase.
And do you see the void area in there?
Yes, sir. It's the area here, here.
And that was part of your investigation to determine what could be seen,
What could be seen and what occurred.
and specifically what Officer Delke could see when he was in the void area in reference to Mr. Hambrick?
Yes, sir.
Next slide, clear that. Okay, now we're gonna have a series of movements. Stop. And what did you notice in the area between Mr. Delke and this rock? What did you notice there?
There's a shadow area under that tree, and there's a shadow that starts moving this direction. Once Mr. Hambrick's out of view for just a second, this area right here is actually a shadow being cast by Mr. Hambrick.
Who's casting the shadow?
Mr. Hambrick.
In your opinion, sir, could Officer Delke see Mr. Hambrick?
Yes, sir, in this position.
And that's out Mr. Hambrick's shadow in that image.
Yes, sir.
Clear it. Next.
You can see the shadows moving here.
Okay, now rewind that slowly. And the shadow is now moving towards Officer Delke.
Correct. Once it gets to the shadow where the tree is, the sun is no longer.
Okay. Now, let's keep going and see if we can see Officer Delke's shadow. Stop. Can you see Officer Delke's shadow in that slide?
Yes, so you can see it here, but you can also see it here on the street. There's a shadow area.
Clear that. Go back a few frames. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, Mr. Lawrence, you'll see a number, frame number. We're going to go through the frames, and you tell us to stop when you see Officer Delke's shadow first appear.
Stop. That's the 63. That's the first shadow Officer Delke's casted.
That's
draw,
French.
draw something around that shadow.
It's extending right there.
Okay.
Also, it's seen here.
All right, just stick with the one on the left if you
Okay.
would. Mark the one on the left where you can see that. So that's Officer Delke's shadow.
Correct.
So even though we can't see him, we know that that's him.
Correct.
All right, clear that, go to the next slide.
You see it separating now from the existing shadow from the tree.
So that's slide 64.
Yes, sir.
Next slide,
Again, there's number 3,
next slide,
number 4,
next slide,
number 5,
next,
number 6,
yes, next.
number 7, number 8, number
Right
9.
there, draw a circle around that. Next slide,
10, and
clear.
that's the last one.
All right, sir. Now, were you able to determine approximately how many slides showed Mr. Hambrick's shadow as he's moving along?
I was able to observe 9 shadows from Mr. Hambrick.
And how many shadows were you able to discern from Officer Delke?
10.
Why are there more shadows, in your opinion, of Officer Delke than Mr. Hambrick?
In my opinion, it's because Officer Delke was taking a wider angle around the side of the building.
Even though, in your opinion, around the side of the building in the void area was, in your opinion, was Mr. Hambrick visible to Officer Delke around the side of the void area?
He was in position to see him, yes, sir.
And you can discern that in part because of these shadows?
That with the work I completed.
Yes, sir. Next slide. Now here, you added some more contrast so we could see these things a little more clearly, but let's just go through this a little quicker. Thank you. Next slide. Your Honor, to take a moment because we're going from a moving image to a still image. All right, so next slide. Tell us what this is.
This is a diagram I've completed, and I have marked the trajectory of the shadows coming from the sun. And I've marked it up above, shadows in video, P23C1 Joe Johnson.
If you could move your mic a little bit. There you go.
I documented where I got my information from, which was this camera, P23C1.
Is that the angle of the shadows that you were able to measure?
Yes, sir.
Next slide. What is the angle of the shadows, sir?
45 degrees.
Next slide. What do we see here?
I have highlighted in yellow the sun's rays hitting the building, and you can see at the corner where there was nothing to capture the rays, so it continued on to where it actually went over to Henry Howe Boulevard.
The orange person.
That's the position Mr. Hambrick would have been in to break the plane of the shadow, to cause the shadow, his first location.
So when we first see the shadow in the image from the camera going the other direction, that's where Mr. Hambrick is.
Approximately in this location. That's where he would have broke the area where the sun would have shined through.
We just mark, well, we'll see that in the next slide. Next slide.
That's where I've marked it, and I'm using the cameras P21, P23 as references and frame rate and frame numbers.
Next slide. What's that?
I've included Officer Delke now.
From where Officer Delke is, can he see Mr. Hambrick?
He's in position to, yes, sir.
Next slide.
I highlighted an area of his position of what he could have viewed.
And where is that shadow? If you would just mark on here, where are we seeing the shadow? Where's the shadow appear?
The shadow's appearing here. There's a tree right there,
yeah.
And it's just to the north of that tree, right at the base of it.
And that's what we're looking at when we're looking at it from a different camera angle.
Yes, sir.
Next slide. The distance.
It's approximate. It's 45 feet.
Next slide. What's happening now?
They've gone a little further. I've documented the frame and the cameras used. Mr. Hambrick is still casting a shadow, and he's just now starting to come around the building. And yes, sir, he's just rounding the corner. There's a bush here on the corner that you have to run around.
All right, so is Officer Delke in a position to see Mr. Hambrick?
Yes, sir.
Next slide. What is
Again,
that?
it's highlighted what the viewing area would have been.
Next slide. Clear that.
Approximately 43.8 feet.
Next slide.
Mr. Hambrick is now on the sidewalk of 1601. He's got 1 foot down. He is still being lit up by the shadow, and Officer Delke is here, but he is not in position to see Mr. Hambrick.
He cannot.
No, sir.
Next slide.
It's a viewpoint. At most, he could have seen an arm, but very unlikely.
Sir?
At most, he could have seen an arm, but it's very unlikely.
Okay, and the amount of time that he was out of view is
Just a matter of seconds.
seconds or fraction of a second?
Fraction, basically.
Next slide.
And it's approximately 38 and a half feet.
For a fraction of a second.
Yes, sir.
Next slide. Next slide. Is that it? Okay. All right, if Your Honor, please, before we go to the next series, I'll make that. Exhibit next in order.
That's 67.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, of course, we don't have that camera from across the street showing whatever it might have shown of that void.
No, sir.
Now, to complete this, did you carry your diagrams on around the front from the void going down Joe Johnson to where Mr. Hambrick was ultimately shot to determine distances?
Yes, sir.
So it's the same diagram except it continues on.
Yes, sir.
All right, hand this to the witness and hand this to the judge, please, so the judge can see that before I introduce it. Lawrence, tell us what that is.
These are a series of diagrams of movement of Mr. Hambrick and Officer Delke.
From the void area to where Mr. Hambrick is ultimately shot?
Correct.
And these are your diagrams, you put this together?
Yes, sir.
And it's based on your measurements of everything?
Yes, sir. The measurements are approximate, but
Yes. Now, when you were measuring the sidewalk, did you use approximate measurements of the sidewalk, or how did you measure the sidewalk? How do you know how long the sidewalk is?
without having measurements furnished to me, I had to get them myself. If you look on the diagram, you see squares on the sidewalk. I measured each individual square.
Each square in the sidewalk you measured?
Yes, sir, to assist me with distances.
All right, now, let's, if we could, Your Honor, if we just put that up.
All right.
Go ahead. What is this?
This is the diagram I completed.
What are we seeing here?
It's an overhead view of the 1600 block of Joe Johnson, 1601 to 1619 on the south side of Joe Johnson.
And this is the same thing we saw a moment ago, but without the shadows imparted.
Yes, sir.
And the orange person is Mr. Hambrick,
Yes, sir.
blue, Officer Delke.
Correct.
Next slide. What's the distance, approximately?
This one's showing 36 feet.
Next slide. Now what are they doing?
I'm sorry?
What's happening here?
Mr. Hambrick is starting to go around the corner, and Officer Delke is starting to disappear out of view of camera 21.
Next slide.
About close to 36 feet.
Next slide.
Mr. Hambrick is now on the sidewalk at 1601, and Officer Delke is leaving our view of P21.
Next slide.
Approximately 37, almost 38 feet.
Next slide.
Mr. Hambrick has crossed 1603. He's in the grass area between 1603 and 1605, Joe Johnson. And Officer Delke is just coming around the corner, 1601.
Next slide.
Approximately 45 and a half feet.
Next slide.
Mr. Hambrick's crossing 1605, Joe Johnson, on the personal sidewalk into the grass. Officer Delke is now on the sidewalk to 1601, Joe Johnson.
Next slide.
Approximately 46 feet.
Next slide.
Mr. Hambrick is on it's a manhole cover, I believe, for water main. And Officer Delke is near this one for 1601, 1603.
Next slide.
Approximately 47.5 feet. And these are approximate locations. As you can see, there's a tree here that obscures the view for most of it.
Next slide.
I didn't do anything in this area because I couldn't see anything with the tree, but
You could move the mic, I'm having trouble hearing you.
I didn't do anything in this area because the tree obscured my view of what I was viewing. And this is the location of when the shooting took place.
Okay. And you got that off of MLK?
MLK camera.
All right.
And the measurements that I had taken.
All right. Next slide.
It's approximately 49 feet.
All right, so it's 49 feet,
Yes, sir.
the distance from firing the shot to where Mr. Hambrick was shot.
Yes, sir. About 16, a little over 16, 17 yards.
All right, so next slide. All right, Your Honor, we'd ask that be marked next slide, next in order.
All right, that'd be 68.
You have, here is, excuse me, Judge, this is a DVD of what we've just seen,
That would be D.
or CD rather. So this will be, I guess, B.
Yeah.
Now, you've talked about the, he's going down Joe Johnson. Everybody's going down Joe Johnson.
Going west, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You hand this to the witness and this to the judge, please. You've seen this before, Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, sir.
What is this?
This is still pictures from pole 23, camera 1.
And it shows all the frame by frame as we're going down.
Yes, sir. It's got the camera number and the time and the frame rate, frame number in the corner.
And it includes enlargements.
Yes, sir.
All right, sir. You know, we'll move through this pretty quickly. Now, these are blow-ups of what we've seen before.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's have the first frame. This is pole 23, camera 1.
Yes, sir.
Next, now you see here on the lower right-hand side, you see the pole number and the camera number.
Pole number, the time 7:02, and then the frame number.
And the top hand left is the time is recorded on the image itself.
Correct. It's 7:26:18, 19:02:52, which is 7:02:52 seconds.
Next slide. Now, who's that?
Mr. Hambrick is just coming into view on pole 27. Pole 23, camera 1.
Next slide. Next slide. You see, is that Mr. Hambrick?
I'm sorry?
Is that Mr. Hambrick?
Yes, sir.
Next slide. Officer, Mr. Lawrence, you're a police officer in addition to being a crime scene investigator.
Yes, sir.
What is that in his right hand?
It looks like the .40 caliber Beretta.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Can you see Mr. Hambrick's left hand?
Yes, sir.
What does he have in his left hand?
Nothing. You can see the fingers kind of,
What does he got in his right hand?
it appears to be the weapon.
Next slide. Now, go back one. Did you notice in the Officer Delke's broadcast, when he broadcast out to the other officers on the team, Mr. Hambrick was wearing a blue shirt?
Yes, sir.
What color is that shirt?
Blue and white.
And he said the weapon was black?
Yes, sir.
What color is the weapon?
Black.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Do you see, next slide? What do you see in Mr. Hambrick's right hand?
It's distorted, but it's the same thing. It's a weapon.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. What is that?
Still appears to be the weapon in his right hand.
Next slide. Next slide. Blow up on that. Next slide. What does Mr. Hambrick appear to be doing?
He's looking over his left shoulder back toward where the area he just came from.
And what does he have in his left hand?
Nothing.
His right hand, in your opinion, is a weapon still in his right hand?
You can't see it. His arm is folded across the front of him.
In your opinion, is a weapon still in his right hand?
Yes, sir.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Can you see either hand? Can you see back?
You can see the left hand there.
Okay, that slide, can you see anything?
No, sir. That one, the one we're on now, 228. Looks like his left hand's down to his side.
Right hand, next slide. Clear. Next slide. See anything in his left hand at this point?
No, sir.
Next slide. Next slide. Can you see either hand at this point?
No, it appears both hands are across the front.
Do you know what transitioning a weapon means?
Yes, sir.
What is that?
Switching from one hand to the other.
Next slide. How long does it take to switch a weapon from one hand to the other?
Very quickly. Very quickly.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Now we see Officer Delke in this picture.
Yes, sir.
What is Officer Delke, before we see Officer Delke appear in these pictures, is Officer Delke in a position to see Mr. Hambrick as he's running along with Joe Johnson?
He would have been able to see him in this area, maybe 2 frames, 3 frames before this one.
Right. Next slide. Clear. Now what do you see there?
There appears to be something in his left hand here.
Something in his left hand now. Is that
Yes,
your
sir.
testimony?
Yes, sir.
So before it was in his right, now it appears to be in his left. In the preceding slide, you didn't see either hand.
No, sir.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, just run these. You can see Officer Delke's shadow as he's running along there, right?
Correct.
Okay. And we'll just finish this up, but obviously you can't see the actual shooting in this series of slides.
No, sir, you cannot.
All right. Your Honor, please would like to mark that exhibit next in order.
Yeah, it's number 69.
And I have a CD of that. Now, Mr. Lawrence, in an attempt to try to get some idea of this void area and how much Officer Delke could see and that sort of thing, did you have occasion to look at some of the slides from the MLK camera?
Yes, sir.
You took certain measurements and made certain determinations of what you could see from the MLK camera side.
Yes, sir.
All right. You can hand this to the witness and hand this to the judge, please. Thank you. What is that you have there?
These are stills from a PowerPoint that myself and Ms. Thomas put together. It shows zoomed in still photos from the MLK camera and photos I took.
And what were you trying to determine?
I was on a ladder next to the MLK camera with my camera directly next to it, shooting the point of view that the MLK camera.
When you say you're on a ladder, what's the point of you being on a ladder?
To get up next to the MLK camera.
To see what it could see?
Correct.
All right, sir. Let's bring that first picture up, if you would. What is that?
Picture in the top left is the still from a zoomed in of the MLK camera from July 26, and it's frame number 15. The picture on the right is the actual picture of the point of view from my camera next to the MLK camera that's not zoomed in. The picture on the left bottom is a zoomed in picture of that same picture.
Now, the one on the right, you're standing on a ladder looking at what MLK can actually see in real without being enhanced or zoomed or anything.
Yes, sir.
The one on the lower left, is that a so-called enhanced or zoomed in picture?
Yes, sir, it is zoomed in.
And what's the one on the top?
That is a still from the MLK camera, which is zoomed in, that I was furnished from Discovery.
And that was provided to us by the government?
Correct.
Next slide. Now, what did you notice when you started looking at this?
I started looking at it and noticed the MLK camera's not straight. It kind of caught my eye pretty quick, and it appeared to be filming tilted about 10 degrees downward and to the right.
Next slide. What's this?
That's the picture we just saw of the MLK, but it's larger. As you can see, the white lines on the street goes downward and to the right, and everything seems to be a little bit shifted to the right and downward.
So when we see this, it's not even level?
No, sir, it's not level.
Next slide.
That's the picture I took zoomed in.
Next slide.
Ms. Thompson is tilting the pictures with
Go
the
back.
10-degree.
What is this now?
This is my picture that was as I took it, and Ms. Thompson is changing the degree of my picture
To match the one from the
to a
MLK?
10-degree angle. Yes, sir.
All right, now what are we doing?
Now, the MLK still is on top of my picture, and it's straight on our screen, but we're going to superimpose my picture and this picture together.
All right, let's go backwards and we can see the graphic. So now we're going to see it actually rotate.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead. So you superimposed your reproduction with what was actually taken.
Correct.
In your opinion, that camera was shooting at least 10 degrees off.
Yes, sir.
Next slide. What is this?
This is while I'm up on the pole on the ladder, I've got two co-workers with me. One's in a reflective yellow green jacket, and another one is down on foot near her taking photographs of her positioning. So I had her in the void area and slowly start walking towards Joe Johnson until I can first see her on camera from the area of the MLK.
And what was the point of doing that?
Because the MLK camera actually showed Mr. Hambrick and Officer Delke coming into view long before P23 picked them up. So we had a void area just before they hit P21, and I was trying to get as much area covered as I could.
So by doing this rotation, you were able to determine where Officer Delke and where Officer and Mr. Hambrick would have been.
Would have been first picked up on a camera on the front side.
Okay, so this MLK camera would show more of their presence, as it were, than the...
Yep, it's not clear, but it's just showed you can see movement and clothing.
So the one where the camera was out, that pole shows some movement, but they were in view long before then.
Correct.
And of course, if we didn't have that camera from across the street, which they never recovered, we would have known that for sure.
Yes, sir.
Next slide. What's that?
As you can see in this picture, the white there in the center is the first frame I saw where Mr. Hambrick was visible. The one in the bottom is my co-worker with the yellow mark with the yellow green jacket. And to the right is my other co-worker, Ms. Robertson, is standing back about where Officer Delke would have been. And Ms. Alexander is in the same position as she is viewed from the front. That's where she was standing.
And Officer Delke was in a position to see this.
Correct.
And he would have been seeing this as that person was moving backwards toward the camera.
Yes, sir. This is just where the first point from the front we was able to capture. What happened before that, we don't know.
Got it. We don't know because we don't have footage.
Correct.
But in your opinion, based on what the measurements, the shadows, Officer Delke was in a position to be able to see that.
Yes, sir.
Next slide. What's this?
These are the MLK. We're in a different position now. It's hard to see Mr. Hambrick. He's actually behind that pole. You can see some little bit of a white. And this is where he's first captured on camera by P23C1. So we've got quite a bit of movement distance there. The bottom picture shows the circle of the camera P21, I'm P23, and my co-worker is actually behind the pole also. The picture on the top right is again the distance shot from the MLK of what my camera captured. And the picture in the bottom right is the position of Mr. Hambrick first coming into view of P23. So these would be exact.
Can you see Mr. Hambrick in the lower right?
Yes, sir.
Show that. Might make a mark on there where that is.
He just comes into view. It's the first captured screen on P23.
Okay. So even though that pole doesn't show him for a long time, he's still, before then, he's in view of Officer Delke.
Correct.
All right. Next slide.
This is the third view. He's still in the Mr. Hambrick is still in the grass area. He has not reached the sidewalk of 1601 yet. You can see my co-worker, Miss Alexander, here. Again, she's not on the sidewalk. And it is consistent with this photograph of Mr. Hambrick from P23.
Next slide.
Location 4, Mr. Hambrick is now on the sidewalk. You can see his 1 foot on the sidewalk. This is Miss Alexander in about the same spot. And you can see in the bottom right hand, P23C1 is Mr. Hambrick on that sidewalk with 1 foot.
See, this is the same moment in time in all of those images.
Yes, sir. The MDHA cameras are synced together. The Martin Luther King is totally separate and not in order or time.
But you were able to sync them visually.
Correct.
Next slide. Thank you. Your Honor, I'd ask that be marked exhibit next in order, A and B, along with the CD of it.
That would be number 70.
Last exhibit. Now, as part of the discovery in this matter, the state provided us with certain moving images and still images and things that their experts enhanced and worked on.
Yes, sir.
And you looked at all of that.
Yes, sir.
And there was an image called, or series of pictures that TBI got for us called Step by Step. That's what it was called, the file
Yes,
number. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You just take a look at that, see if you can identify it. Give one copy to the judge, please. Are you able to identify those pictures?
Yes, sir. These are still pictures from what was provided.
All right, and that's put together for us by the TBI?
It was in discovery, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. But it was called Step by Step, showing the movements of Mr. Hambrick as this thing unfolded.
Correct.
All right. If you could just bring up the first image. What is this?
This is the white vehicle they arrived in, and you can see the back right door opening up.
And as we know later, Mr. Hambrick's the driver.
Correct.
Next slide. Next slide. What's happening here?
The right rear door is open, ajar.
Next slide.
You can
What's
see
happening here?
You can see the arm, which should be Mr. Hudson, who came out of the back seat.
Next slide. What's this?
Mr. Hudson is now standing at the rear of the car.
Next slide.
Got Mr. Hudson and Mr. Davis.
Okay. And again, this is something put together by given to us in discovery by the TBI.
Yes, sir.
Next slide. What's there?
You got Mr. Davis and you got Mr. Hambrick.
So that's Davis with the backpack, Hambrick,
Correct.
and Hambrick has come out of the driver's side to the best of our knowledge.
Yes, sir.
Next slide.
Got Mr. Hudson, Mr. Davis, and Mr. Hambrick.
All three of them in the same shot.
Yes, sir.
Next slide.
Again, the three.
Next
Mr. Hambrick,
slide.
Davis. Mr. Hudson's now looking south towards Mr. Davis, and I do not see Mr. Hambrick in this picture.
Well, stop for a second. Who's that on the lower left?
I'm sorry, there he is.
I'm sorry?
He's now heading north.
Sir?
He's now heading north. That's Mr. Hambrick.
Who is that picture circled?
That's Mr. Hambrick.
Who is, you see Davis?
Yes, sir. Davis.
And where's Hudson?
Hudson is here.
And where's Delke?
Officer Delke is here.
And, okay, so you got all four people in the same picture.
Correct.
Next slide. Now what's happening?
Officer Delke is in this position, and this is Mr. Hudson, and I believe that's still Mr. Davis up here.
Next slide.
This is Mr. Hambrick crossing the sidewalk of the last apartment on Henry Hill.
These slides are chosen by the TBI.
Yes, sir.
Do you see Mr. Hambrick's left hand?
Yes, sir. It's outstretched.
Do you see his right hand? Do you see anything about his right hand?
There appears to be something in his right hand, but you just can't make it out.
Next slide.
It's in that area. Again, Mr. Hambrick with what I was observing there.
And it's shortly after that that Hambrick falls in the parking lot with the gun in his right hand?
Yes, sir, from there to there.
Next slide.
This is Mr. Hambrick on his fallen, and what I observed is he's on his right side. His right arm is outstretched, and what is in his in his hand is outstretched. It looks like his left hand is down on the pavement.
Next slide.
It's blurred, but you can. This is the time where the cell phone starts to leave his left hand.
Next slide. Next slide.
This area here, that's what was located later to be the cell
Right now, I'm
phone.
going to ask the technician to clear that. And I want you to go back and forth a few times. Does that appear to be some object coming from Mr. Hambrick?
Yes, sir.
And that's the cell phone you think
There was one later found.
underneath that car?
Yes, sir.
Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, we can see Officer Delke, right?
Correct. Right here.
But there's shadows of Mr. Hambrick off to the left.
I might need to go back one, but I don't think the shadows are starting yet.
Okay, that's fine. We'll get to it. Next slide. Now this is around the front.
Yes, sir. This is Mr. Hambrick, and it would have been the second picture, second view from P23.
Next slide. Next slide. Next. Next. This is, he's got, if you go back one. That's, we got nothing in his left hand and an object in his right.
Yes,
And the object in his right, in your opinion, is?
the Beretta 40 caliber.
Next pitch, next slide. Next slide. Keep going. This is where he's looking back.
Yes, sir.
Next slide. Keep going. Did you see Officer Delke in that picture?
No, sir.
Huh? On
No,
the
sir.
left, go back a slide or two.
Oh, yep, he's in the top. He's actually heading toward the doorway here of this apartment.
He's backing into the doorway.
Yes, sir.
Okay, if you could move your mic up a little bit to your face. What's he doing?
He was walking sideways and he's backing into the porch area of that apartment.
With his weapon drawn?
Yes, sir.
Next slide. Who's that on the left?
It's Mr. Hudson.
Next slide.
It's Mr. Davis.
Thank you.
Back at the car.
Okay, clear that. Would you like to have that exhibit?
On 71.
And here's a CD of what Your Honor just saw in evidence. Mr. Lawrence, as a crime scene investigator, what is the professional standard of care in acquiring video evidence when looking at a crime scene?
Gather everything you can, all available.
Why is that?
When working a crime scene, you never know what you got, what is relevant, what is irrelevant. You might have witnesses come forward later. You have to be able to confirm or refute any and all statements made. And with videos from every angle available, you can do that.
And if that evidence is not acquired over the period of 30 days, is that a failure of investigation?
Yes, sir, in my opinion.
Does the videos show not only the participants but the witnesses?
The witnesses and their locations and what they can and cannot see.
So you can verify what witnesses' point of view based on the videos of them?
Correct, and their statements.
I might have a moment, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Those are my questions.
Ross?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. You're excused.
Thank you, sir.
How many other witnesses do you have, Mr. Raymond?
That was my last witness. I have a few other things to put in evidence, like affidavits and stuff. We can do that
Okay,
later.
that's fine. You're talking about the affidavits
You filed yesterday?
Yes, Your Honor.
I read them this morning. Okay, well, we got about 10 or 15 minutes before we break for lunch, so we'll proceed.
Your Honor, please, the first exhibit will be the affidavit of Andrew Delke, stating that he appeared at TBI headquarters for a voluntary interview, but at no time prior to the interview did he view any video of the incident from any source. and that's attested to by Officer Delke. We'd like that marked next in order.
Okay, that's 72. I think there are 4 affidavits, 2 from you and 1 from Mr. Brown. And
That's
one from
correct,
Mr.
Your
Delke.
Honor. Next affidavit is a supplemental affidavit from John M.L. Brown. That states in summary that he's an attorney, that he was assigned the case on July 26, responded to the scene. His purpose was to provide legal counsel for Officer Delke. That he was on site with his client for several hours. At no time did he view any video of the incident. In cooperation with the TBI, his client agreed to be interviewed 2 days later. On the morning of July 28th, he sent Agent Kennard an email, included a request that the media is referring to surveillance, and that he'd like to see that prior to the interview. By return emails, Agent Kennard advised that his client would not be permitted to see any video prior to the interview. At no time prior to Officer Delke's interview did he see any video, and neither did Officer Delke. That would be next exhibit. Whatever number that is.
That would be number 73. I think that's Mr. Brown, right? That's 73.
Right.
You have 2.
I do. Just very
They would be
briefly.
A and B.
Well, if I could mark them separately, because they relate to very different things.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes, sir. My affidavit is in reference to motion in limine number 9, and includes a copy of this crime statistics that this lady had testified to just a few moments ago. So it's the same piece of paper, but I didn't know that that was going to come in today or not.
Okay.
And the last affidavit concerns all the documentation that I was able to amass for the motion regarding the attempted addition of an expert witness by the state. Later we'll get to that. And this is all available information I had as to what happened when, and we'll discuss that later when we get to that issue, but that'll be the last affidavit. Whatever exhibit number that is.
75.
Does Your Honor want me to read into the record the agreed order about what motions in limine we're agreeing to, or?
I mean, it's part of the record, but you could read it into the record since you want to be as complete as possible.
Confer with John Moore.
I think you had put it was under seal.
That's, wait a minute.
Well, I didn't hear it, so I can't agree or disagree. Oh, yeah, it is. It was admitted under seal,
Right.
right?
Well, we did that because we didn't know if Your Honor would sign it yet.
Okay, well, I did sign it.
All right, so, well, we filed it under seal, but now that, if we could just, I mean, we're gonna be talking about this, but,
As judge of the state's position, there's really nothing to talk about since we agreed.
that's fine.
But
We-
whatever.
It's all right. Doesn't matter, if Your Honor, it's documented in the record, we don't need to go over it right now. We
All right,
got other
very
things
well.
we do need to address.
I didn't hear the last thing.
I said there are other issues that we do need to address that are not agreed to, so I don't need to take time up doing
Well,
that.
I'll tell you what, we're gonna address those at 1 o'clock, okay? Because
That'll be
we're gonna go
fine.
ahead and take our lunch break.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, I think I was trying to find an email I was sent. I have a education committee meeting with the Tennessee Judicial Conference. However, I was just going to simply call in and tell them that I was not going to make the meeting, and I think it starts at 1 o'clock. So I'll do that at 1 o'clock. So I'll come in a couple of minutes after 1.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll be in our recess.
in here.
No, you're good. We might likely be working because I was so. But no, you can always get out. Is this thing on the wall? Yes, we can lock it for you.